Another stab of pain hit Sabrina in the belly. This time, it migrated her upper spine toward her brain. She could barely think straight, and she was too weak to fight back or even call out for help. But there was something going on in the bug cage. Had she just seen Puck's cocoon change shape? Cobweb would tell the truth, Sabrina groaned. Not without you, Moth reminded her. That old fool Scrooge couldn't get his grandmother to call from the beyond. I'll just tell your family that you decided to stay here for Puck's emergence while they go ghost hunting. Even if Cobweb does manage to communicate without you, I've made enough elixir for your entire family, Titania, and Mustard Seed. Sabrina heard a ripping sound. Or had it been her imagination? It was becoming difficult to focus. Now that Puck is king, we are going to rebuild a fairy right here. I've already mapped out most of Central Park. We'll run the humans out and build a proper castle that will show the rest of the ever afters who's in charge. They'll bow at our feet. That ripping sound again. It was coming from behind Moth. Then we'll take over the whole city. Humans will make good slaves, Moth continued. Sabrina lifted her heavy eyelids and saw a familiar figure looking down on her from behind Moth. Grim, are you in trouble again? I swear if I had a nickel for every time I had to save your sorry behind, I'd be a rich fairy. Puck, she groaned. Your Majesty, Moth said as she spun around. I can explain this. But she never finished her sentence. Puck took out his flute and blasted a couple of notes. A stream of pixies soared through the window, swooped down, and lifted Sabrina off the ground. What did you do to her, Moth? The little princess shook her head. You don't understand, my love. You don't understand, my love. I did this for us. Puck noticed the goblet lying on the floor. He picked it up and smelled it. Now that wasn't very nice. Puck turned to his pixies. Fine, Cobweb. We need his medicine. There was some buzzing, and Puck's face curled up in horror. My father? The pixies twisted on. Then half of you find my mother, the other half keep an eye on the princess. The pixies did as they were told, depositing Sabrina in Puck's arms as they set about their tasks. Puck raced to the locked door and transformed his legs into those of an elephant. He used one to kick open the door and flew off its hinges and into the hallway. Sabrina looked back to see Moth swatting wildly at the little dots of light. Sabrina was starting to feel cold. She trembled so forcefully it hurt. And then the world started to grow very dim. She could hear Puck telling her to stay awake, but she couldn't. She was so tired, she just wanted to rest. Maybe if she did, the pain would go away. She had a disorienting dream. Puck was standing over her, but he quickly morphed into Titania, who melted into Granny Rhoda, and then into Daphne, who was crying. Don't cry, Daphne. Then Daphne became Canis, who became Hamstead, who became Bess, who became Black Nothingness. Sabrina woke up in the dark. No, dark wasn't the right word. There was light, but it was faint, and seemed to be behind the walls of the tiny room she was sitting in. No, room wasn't the right word either. It was a space, something small, something confined. She tried to stretch out, but her hands met a cold, damp wall. She reached down and realized she was sitting in fluid, something like gravy, and was halfway up her chest. She started to panic, reaching around for an opening, and found something above her like a seam. She pushed upward and a small portion of it tore away. A bright light flooded the space and she forced herself to stand. She had freed herself, and there, waiting on the other side, was her family. That was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen, Puck said. Why do I carry a camera with me? So when I looked down the poison she had just escaped from and quickly fought the urge to bath when she realized she had just been inside her own cocoon. Granny Rhoda and Oz rushed to her and wiped away the layers of goop. How are you feeling? Granny asked. I feel fine, but I'll never eat eggplant again as long as I live, Sabrina said, looking down at the crushed cocoon. The cocoon removed the poisons from your system and allowed you to heal, Oz explained. What Moth used wouldn't have been lethal without it. She tried to poison you like she did Oberon, Daphne said, rushing to her sister and wrapping her arms around Sabrina's neck. The pixies made her confess. She told me everything, Sabrina said. She was trying to impress Puck. She was hoping to prove herself so he would marry her. Where is she? She hasn't been arrested. She'll see a judge as soon as we can determine who might be qualified to be one, Mustard Seed said. He smiled and turned to his brother. Mom's waiting. Duty calls, Puck said as he rolled his eyes. He waved to Sabrina and left with his brother. Granny hugged Sabrina and burst into tears. I'm sorry, Sabrina. I would never forgive myself if you got hurt. I should protect you. I should prevent any harm from happening to you. This wasn't your fault, Sabrina replied. We knew Moth was mean. We just didn't know she was homicidal. We need to question her about the Scarlet Hand now. She can tell us things. She might even know who kidnapped Mom and Dad and put the spell on them. Granny shook her head. She confessed to everything. She isn't in the Scarlet Hand. Chapter 9. On Christmas Eve morning, Sabrina, Daphne, Granny Rhoda, Mr. Candace, Mr. Hampstead, Bess, Mustard Seed, Puck, Titania, Oz, and a slew of fairies stood on a desolate bank of the Hudson River. On the shore was a boat carved from the trunk of an enormous tree. Inside, Oberon's body rested, gently rising and falling with the river's waves. A long sword was in his hands, and he was wearing a suit of leather armor with a lion painted on the chest. Titania gave a speech, wishing her husband a safe passage into the next world. She placed a red rose on his chest, which she said had been grown in the fairy homeland, and then she stepped aside. Mustard Seed followed, sharing memories of his father, his bravery in the days long ago. His struggles at his fairy's new home in America collapsed, and even his plans to rebuild. He placed a white rose next to his mother's head. Then it was Puck's turn to speak. My father was a complicated man, one of strong traditions. He had unbendable beliefs, and those beliefs often got in the way of new beginnings. He wanted the best for us, but he didn't always know how to make that happen. I was easily frustrated when we disagreed. As I am the new king of fairy, his blood wouldn't do. Puck tossed a green rose onto his father's chest. One of the ogres from the Golden Egg stepped forward with a torch and handed it to Puck. The boy fairy took it and set the boat ablaze. Then he and his brother pushed it out into the water. The flames quickly engulfed the floating casket, and the river took it away. Soon it was out of sight. Oz stepped up to the ferryport landing group. I suppose you'll be leaving soon. Granny Rhoda nodded. We've got to get back home and see if we can wake up the girls' parents. I wish you the best of luck, Oz said as he turned to the girls and shook their hands. Well, I've got to get back to work. It's Christmas Eve and another one of the elves is on the fritz. The crowd began to drift away. Granny suggested they return to the hotel for some rest before the long drive home. Sabrina said she'd be along in a minute and then turned back towards Puck. He was discussing something with his brother. Mustard Seed nodded, and his wings popped out of his back. He took to the sky and flew away. Sabrina walked over to join Puck. He didn't notice her at first, but when he did, he quickly wiped his tears on his sleeve. He forced a smile, but then let it fade. She reached out and took his hand, and they stood looking out at the river in silence. So, what do I call you? Your Majesty? You should have been calling me that all along, Puck said. What you said was very nice, Sabrina said. My mother wrote it for me. She didn't care too much for what I came up with myself. Sabrina smiled. There's no one here now. Why don't you go ahead with your version? Puck tilted his head curiously at Sabrina and smiled. My father was mean, arrogant, horrible, and selfish. He cared little for no one. He cared little for anyone, and less for those who disagreed with him. His only love was for his precious kingdom. Sabrina raised her eyebrows, admiring the boy's honesty, but remained quiet. Puck turned to the water as if his father was still there listening. I hated you, he shouted. You took every opportunity to remind me that I was weak and stupid. Suddenly, Puck fell to his knees. Tears streamed down on his cheeks. Sabrina rushed to him, knelt down, and used her scarf to wipe them away. When I was barely out of diapers, he took me aside and told me that I would never be king. He said I was a disappointment to him, and he would never give up his throne to me. I went to my mother in tears, and she explained him to me. She said he was worried about the kingdom's future and feared that his successor would destroy it, even if that successor was his own son. My mother swore that one day I would wear the crown, and he would never see it coming. Until then, I would have my own kingdom. Then she gave me my name, the Trickster King. I have worn it proudly ever since. When I got older, he tried to force me to marry Moth, so I told the old man he was nuts. Disobeying your father is a crime in our world. He banished me, but here I am, the king of fairy anyway. My mother's right, he never saw it coming. He stood up and wiped his eyes on his sleeve. If you tell anyone I was crying, you'll regret it, Pussbrain. I won't tell, Stinkpot, Sabrina said affectionately. Looks like you and me finally have something in common. What's that? Families we're not sure we want to be part of, Sabrina replied. The old lady told me you're quitting, Puck said. I'm not quitting, I'm retiring. You can't quit something you never wanted to do in the first place, Sabrina said defensively. You can't quit something you never tried either. I tried, but people got hurt when I tried, Sabrina said. Look at Miss Canis, and you. Oh, poor Sabrina, such a walking disaster. I was there. Mr. Canis didn't get hurt because you were being stupid. You were the one that saved him and the rest of us. If you hadn't done what you did, we'd all be dead. The truth is, and I hate to admit it, but you're a hero and a pretty good one. You help people no one else can. From what I hear, that's what your mother did too. It's in your blood, and blood isn't something you can walk away from. When did you suddenly become Mr. Maturity? Puck laughed. Don't worry, it won't last. He belched in her face. See, it's over. So I guess you're going to have to stay and take over what's left of Fairy, Sabrina said softly. Before Puck could answer, there was a loud commotion up on the hill overlooking the river. People were shouting and screaming. Puck and Sabrina looked at each other and then ran to find out what was going on. Mr. Hamster was lying on the ground. Bess knelt beside him. Tony Fats was hovering above the couple with clenched fists. Poor Mr. Hamster looked as if he had been stalked in the eye. I told you to leave my girl alone, Tony Fats called. And I told you I'm not your girl anymore, Tony, Bess cried. Mr. Hamster crawled to his feet. Bess, I can handle this. He turned to Tony Fat. Is this how you want to do it? That's fine with me. The two men rushed at each other, throwing fists and landing horrible blows. Tony Fats was the first to fall, but he quickly got up and knocked Mr. Hamster into a mud puddle. The portly man fell with a painful thud. Sabrina spotted Mr. Canis in the crowd. He was watching as if he had no concern for his friend. Sabrina raced to him and tugged on his sleeve. We have to stop this. Mr. Hamster is going to get hurt. Mr. Canis shook his head. The pig is tougher than he looks, child. Tony Fats is twice his size, Sabrina cried. And the wolf is 4 times his size, and Stan Hamster had no trouble taking me down. As I said, he's tougher than he looks. Tony Fats kicked Hamster mercilessly, forcing him to flounder in the mud. Each time that seems to be the end of this video. I'll see you later. Goodbye.